So now we are going to start with John Locke. Okay. So basically, first we will quickly read or go through his PYQ. Okay. So first question is asked on the condition of human life which requires labor, materials, uh, and materials to work on necessary introduces private possessions. So basically, this theory of property. Okay. Then and this theory of natural rights and property. Okay. Then again, his theory of property asked. Okay. So basically, when you see all these PYQs, I have mapped them into five themes. So they are basically theory of natural rights and property, limited governance and constitutionalism, then social contract and majoritarianism, then individualism and law, liberty, and revolution. Okay. Then these are the intros. Okay. So the first intro, John Locke, the father of liberalism, grounded political legitimacy in consent and social contract by identifying life, liberty, and property as inalienable natural rights. He established limited state as a conditional trust, asserting that where there is no law, there is no liberty. Okay, so this introduction you can write for questions which are asked about or which are asked on liberal constitutionalist angle. Okay, liberal constitutionalist angle. Okay. Then the second introduction, an individualist out and out, Locke argued that preservation of property is the primary end of a government. Okay. Through his labor theory of value, he pioneered possessive individualism. Okay, balancing rule of law with the right to revolution to shape the foundation of modern Western democracies. Okay, so if such type of questions is asked, okay, which type? So basically questions on individualistic or individualism and right to property, okay, is asked, you can use uh, this introduction. Okay, so these are the two introductions. Then after this we are going to study about his concern or his context significance. Okay, so basically, first we are going to read about his context. So, what was his context? So, basically, every thinker is a child of his times. Okay, so during his time, glorious revolution was happening. Okay, in 1688. Okay, and this revolution was quite peaceful revolution, unlike Hobbes, who had Spanish Armada, okay, and other such revolutions which were violent in nature. So basically, due to the glorious revolution in his time, he was influenced, okay, and that is why he developed his theory of social contract or the type of government in which he gave individuals, okay, individuals more power or supremacy over state, okay. So basically, he preferred or his concern was that individuals prior to state. Okay. Then what is his significance? So he is called as the father of liberalism. Okay. Why? Because he gave the idea of a limited state. Okay, or limited power to the state. Okay. Then he was the first exponent of the doctrine of civil society. Okay. Then he's a scholar of a capital of the capitalist class. Okay, due to his theory of natural rights, his right to property. Okay, and he's also the scholar of possessive individualism. Okay, which is basically why he's called the scholar of possessive individualism because of his absolute right to property. Okay. Then his methodology, basically, he is from the tradition of social contract, okay, or a social contractualist. Then about his works, okay. So basically, there are two treatises on civil government. Is what his work is, okay. The first treatise basically explains or is a critique of Filmer's theory. Okay, and the second treatise is about the theory of government using social contract. Okay, so now we are going to study about his works. Okay, the two treatises on social government. So basically, what were his treatises? Okay, so basically they served as a foundational text of modern liberalism. So first, they served as the foundational texts of modern liberalism and constitutionalism. Okay, while if you can say here that the first treatise, so basically the first treatise is a negative work aimed at is a negative work. Okay, why we call it as a negative work? Because it is aimed at dismantling old justifications for absolute power. Okay, as it dismantles old justification of absolute power. Okay, then the second treatise is basically a positive work. Why? Because uh, Locke in his second treatise basically builds the theoretical framework, okay, for a limited and consent based government. Okay, so basically this is his two works. Okay, then now we are going to read about his first work. So basically his first treatise, it is basically a criticism of filmers. Okay, it is a critique of filmers theory of patriarcha. Okay, Hmm. Then so basically it is a critique or point to point refutation uh, of absolute monarchy. Okay, which argued that basically kings ruled by divine right because they were higher direct heirs of Adam. Okay, so this was the view given by Filmer. Okay, so he was basically a critique of social contract. Okay, Filmer was a critique of social contract. So according to Filmer, what basically what about the individuals who had not consented? Okay, so he is a critique of social contract, and he asked the question that what about individuals who have not consented. Okay, not consented to the social contract. So basically, he thinks that it is an unstable theory. Okay, or it makes unstable. Okay, so Locke refutes Filmer's patriarchal theory. Okay, so according to Locke, the first is first basically he rejects patriarchalism. Okay, rejects patriarchalism. Okay, Locke argued that the state is not a big family and that political authority is not same as parental authority. Okay, state not a big not a big family. Okay, and it is not and sorry and political authority is not the same as parental authority. Okay, then according to him, basically, sorry, the second point is artificial versus natural power. Okay, so he clarified that while parental authority is parental authority is natural, okay, political authority is artificial and created by an agreement of men. Okay, by the agreement of men. Okay, so according to him, while parental authority is natural, okay, uh, political authority is artificial as it is an agreement created or agreement between men, okay, or created by men. Okay, then here you can also link it to Aristotle. Okay, where Locke basically echoes Aristotle's view that the authority of master differs from the authority of the statesman. Okay, you can link Aristotle here. So basically, he wants to tell that authority of a master over a slave, okay, or the authority of a father over a family is fundamentally different from the statesman's authority over free and equal citizens, okay. So with this, the first treatise is over. Now, in his second treatise, he basically gives the theory of liberal state, where he explains few concepts like state of nature, okay, his theory of property, his social contract tradition, then limited government, okay, then separation of powers and the right to revolution, okay. So basically he explains all this in the second treatise, okay. So now we are going to study about his second treatise, okay. So in this treatise basically Locke describes or gives his theory of government by using social contract. But before arriving at social contract, we are going to learn about his views on human nature and state of nature, okay. So basically first his views on human nature. So as we know that every thinker is a child of his times. So basically, during Locke's time, there was glorious revolution, okay, due to which he has arrived on a balanced view on human nature, okay. So basically, this is contrary to Hobbes' view of human nature, okay. But it is all during basically what the context is, okay. For example, during Hobbes' time, there was very violence, and during Locke's time, there was peaceful and quiet, okay. So that is the difference it makes in their views, okay. So basically, John Locke's views on human nature and the state of nature are characterized by positive rational outlook, okay, serving as the foundation of the liberal philosophy, okay. So first is on his human nature, as we read the context. So basically, in according to his view, okay, according to Locke's view, okay, humans are fundamentally rational and enlightened, okay. Humans are rational and enlightened, unlike Hobbes, okay, unlike Hobbes' view on human nature, okay, and guided by reason, okay. That is the law of nature. Reason is the law of nature. Hmm? Then, while humans have their passion, okay, while humans have their passion, they have reason as well, okay. So basically, their reason allows them to recognize and respect the inherent rights of others, okay. Reason in man allows them to respect and recognize rights of others, okay. Then moral equality, okay. So according to Locke, humans are by nature free, equal, and independent, okay. They possess an inherent sense of morality even before the state exists, okay. So humans by nature are free, equal, and independent, okay. And basically they possess an inherent sense of morality, okay. So inherent sense of morality was there, okay, before, even before the state exists, okay. Okay, then we are going to read about his views on state of nature. So once we have understood his views on human nature, so now we are going to understand his views on state of nature. Okay. So basically, the state of nature had both peace and inconvenience. Okay. So according to him, first, the state of nature was in a state of peace. Okay. So why he says so? Because so basically, Locke describes state of nature as a condition of peace, goodwill, and mutual assistance. Okay, where people live together according to reason. Okay, so basically, state of peace. So state of nature as a condition of peace, goodwill, etc., which is guided by human reason. Okay, then pre-political rights. So according to Hobbes, or in this state, basically in state of nature, individuals already enjoy natural rights to life, liberty, and property. Okay, then what is the inconvenience here? Okay, so according to Locke, the primary defect in the state of nature is the absence of a common judge. Okay, which or which does not enforce the law of nature. Okay, so basically primary defect in state of nature is the absence of a common judge or an established authority to interpret and enforce the law of nature. Okay, so basically according to him the main issue is that there is no common judge or authority. Okay, then there is no one to interpret and enforce the law of nature. Okay, so that is his inconvenience. And he also says that the state of nature is not a state of war. Okay. Hmm. So it only becomes a state of war when someone uses force without right. Okay. State of war only when someone uses force without rights. Okay. So basically, or otherwise, it is a state of harmony that is simply inconvenient. Okay, due to lack of uh, impartial adjudication. Okay, So basically, state of nature is at war only when force is used without rights. Okay. So basically, you can here also link J.S. Mill's famous quote, or it is attributed to him, that my right ends where your nose begins. Okay, so basically that, which we will read in J.S. Mill as well. Okay, so the state of nature, his views on state of nature and his views on human nature are over. Okay, after this, we will read about why Locke is an individualist as whole. Okay, so now it is said that Hobbes is an individualist. Okay, so basically, what is individualism is basically prioritizing self or individual over the whole. Okay, so basically, Locke is described as, or Locke is an individualist out and out. Okay, which means that Locke is an individualist both methodologically plus in a normative sense as well. Okay, methodologically means he uses individualism as a methodology to describe his social contract, okay, or to give his theory of social contract. And in a normative sense means basically he finds nothing wrong in to be an individualist. Okay, then so basically Hobbes prioritizes the individual over the state in both senses, okay, methodological and normative. So basically, his individualism is rooted in the belief that individuals by nature, okay. So here you can write or link his like human nature here, okay. Humans by nature, according to him, are free, equal, and independent, and possess inherent natural rights to life, liberty, and property. Okay, that exist prior to the state. Okay, then unlike other thinkers who view the state as natural, like Aristotle or Plato, or a divine entity, okay, like Filmer, okay, then or else yes, or Filmer, okay. The Locke argues that basically political authority is artificial, created solely through the voluntary consent of individuals, okay, to serve as a matter of convenience, okay. So basically, he wants to say that state is artificial and created to solve the inconveniences, okay, faced by humans in state of nature, okay. So basically, for him, consent is the basis of authority, okay, as the basis of authority. Okay, so according to him, government has no original power. Okay, and the power is basically given by the people. Okay, so government as artificial entity who serves as a matter of convenience. Okay, So basically, the government is there to solve the inconveniences. Okay, and that is why the Hobbes gives, or consequently, basically basically one, two, three, four, five. So government is an artificial entity, okay, which serves as a matter of convenience, okay, because there are inconveniences in state of nature, like there is no common authority, there is no one to interpret, and no one to adjudicate the natural law. Okay, so that is why the government here comes in place, and basically, according to him, the state is a limited trust. Okay, whose only legitimate purpose is the preservation of individual rights. Okay, so state is a limited trust. Okay, whose only legitimate purpose is the the preservation of individuals' rights. Okay, Hmm. If it's on basically if the state fails. Okay, so if the state fails, so the ordinary men. Okay, have the right to revolt. Okay, so basically, he Locke has faith in ordinary men, and that is why he gives the right to revolt. Okay, unlike Hobbes, who gave the right to resist. Okay, but not the right to revolt. Okay, there is a difference, and also he is an individualist out and out because he gives the absolute right over property. Okay, so here you can link data. So here you can link Hobbes, okay, who is an who begins as an individualist but ends as an absolutist. Okay, so his debate on, or his theory of individualism versus absolutism, you can link that here. Okay, then you can also link Aristotle here. Okay, mechanistic versus organic state. Then you can also link to modern rights framework. Okay, like UDHR. Okay, so basically, let me explain them quickly. First, the linkage to Hobbes is that while Sabine labels Hobbes as the greatest of all individualists for grounding the state in individual self-preservation, okay, C.V. Macpherson notes that Hobbes ends as an absolutist, which is right, basically. In contrast, okay, when we see Locke, so Locke remains a consistent individualist, okay, throughout, because because Locke nowhere justifies the absolute power to state, okay, and ensures that individuals remain prior to state, okay. Then you can link here Aristotle. So basically, Locke's individualism represents a mechanistic view of the state, okay, where state is an artificial tool of utility, okay, whereas This is a very sharp contrast to Aristotle's organic view, okay, where Aristotle thinks that the state is prior to the individual, okay, and is a natural necessity for to realize their moral potential, okay, for humans to realize their moral potential. Okay. Then here the linkages to the modern rights framework, okay. So basically, you can directly link this to the U.S. Declaration of Independence and Article 3 of UDHR. Okay. So, yes, with this is Locke as an individualist is done. After this, we are going to read about his social contract. Okay. So now we are going to read about Locke's social contract. Okay. So first, John Locke's social contract theory is his cornerstone or the cornerstone of modern liberal democracy. Okay, cornerstone of modern liberal democracy. Okay, so to like what is the context? Okay, so what is the context or in what context he gave this social contract theory? So basically, the context is as we have studied the Glorious Revolution. Okay, so he is basically the child of the Glorious Revolution. So unlike Hobbes, who basically witnessed chaos of the Civil War, okay, during his time, Locke witnessed a peaceful change of power, okay, leading to his more balanced and optimistic view of the human nature and governance. Okay, so the first thing about his social contract is the starting point is basically his views on human nature and state of nature. Okay, so his views on human nature and state of nature. Okay, so basically we have studied this above, so I won't repeat this. But in short, I will explain. Locke believes that humans are fundamentally rational and enlightened, okay, and guided by reason. And in basically, Locke's state of nature is very peaceful and full of goodwill and mutual assistance, okay. And people there already enjoy their natural rights, okay. Then, what is the concern here? Okay, so what is the basically concern here or the issue here? Okay, the issue is that first, state of nature is inconvenient. Why? Due to absence absence of common authority. Okay, so what role does this common authority do? Basically, the role of the common authority is to so, in the state of nature, basically, there is an inconvenience that is the absence of a common authority or a common power, okay, to basically make laws, that is the legislative function, okay, then to execute laws, which is basically the executive function of the executive, and then adjudicate laws, which is basically the function of the judiciary, okay. Then Locke basically proposes two kinds of contract. Okay. Then so there is a two-stage contract. Okay, which Locke proposes. So basically that is. to transition. So basically, the two-stage processes is to transition into a civil society. Okay, so stage one. In stage one, he talks about social contract. Okay, so according to him, individuals mutually agree to form a civil society. Okay, mutually agree to form a civil society. Okay, Hmm. And this contract is between the individuals and is permanent. Okay, okay. Then the second stage. Okay, so basically this first stage is the formal recognition of fellow men. Okay, then comes the stage two. Okay, which is basically the governmental contract. Okay, so basically, what is a governmental contract? So after the society has signed the social contract, okay, the society establishes a government as a trust. Okay, and the government is not a party to the first contract but a servant of the society. Okay, and government is not a party to the first contract. Okay, so government is basically a servant of the society. Okay, then and in this state, okay, so in this state basically natural rights, okay, that is the right to life, liberty, and property are inalienable rights. Okay, inalienable rights. Okay, then what is basically the nature of Lockean state? Okay, then what is the nature of Lockean state? Hmm. So the first thing is that consent as the basis. Okay, so legitimacy is derived from the consent of the governed. Okay, is derived from the consent of the governed. Okay. Hmm. So basically, he distinguishes between two types of consent. That is, first is express consent. Okay, which basically means active agreement. Okay, which basically means an active agreement. Okay, and a tacit consent, which is basically implied by living under the laws. Okay. Mm. So basically, this is how he described consent. Okay. Then the second point, or the second point of his nature of his state was, so basically, the second feature was his limited government. Okay. So Hobbes, as we know, is an individualist. Okay. So that is why he gave the concept of limited government, where the state is a night watchman. Okay. Night watchman. Okay. Restricted to protect natural rights and resolving disputes. Okay. And so basically, the state's role is restricted to protect natural rights and resolve disputes. Okay. Then the third feature is the rule of law. Okay. Hmm. So basically, according, or we can take here his theory on law and liberty. Okay. So according to him, the end of law is not to abolish or restrain, but to preserve and enlarge freedom. Okay. Hmm. And also, he believes that, or he quotes that, where there is no law, there is no liberty. Okay. No law, no liberty. Okay. So basically, order. Okay. And no arbitrary power. Okay. So where there is law, there is liberty. Basically, it means that. Okay. Then, according to him, natural law, okay, which means the human reason, okay, is basically the ultimate guarantee, okay, ultimate guarantee for enjoyment of liberty, okay, for enjoyment of liberty, okay. Then you can link here Hobbes. Okay, you can also link Menka Gandhi case. Okay, with respect to Article 21. Okay, then so basically he also gives one more feature. So there is one more feature, that is, and the last feature of a Lockean state is a safety valve. That is the right to revolt. Okay. Hmm. So why he gives the right to revolt? Okay. Since government is a trust. Okay. Since government is a trust, and if it fails, hmm, and if it fails to protect all or any of the natural rights. Okay, all or any of the natural rights, that is right to life, liberty and property. Okay, or becomes tyrannical. Okay, so basically if it violates or if it fails to protect, okay, or becomes tyrannical, so basically it violates the trust. Okay, it violates the trust. In such cases, the people have basically so people have moral right to peacefully or forcefully revolt, have the right to revolt and change the government if deemed necessary. Okay. Then here also you can link his views on rights, basically, uh, like his theory of natural rights. Okay, which are prior to the government. Okay, so natural rights are prior to the government. Okay, then you can also link here his, or you can also link UDHR. Okay, as I've told above, Article 3, or the Declaration of American Independence. Okay, then few value additions here. Okay, so linkages I will tell you. So first scholar link is basically CB Macpherson. Okay, so basically he labels Locke as a possessive individualist. Okay, arguing that Locke's theory primarily serves the interest of the industrious or capitalist class, okay, by making property a pre-political right. Okay, Locke as possessive individualist, as he makes right to property, okay, a pre-political right. Okay, political right. That is why he's also the thinker of a thinker of for the interest of capitalist class. Okay, then you can here as well compare with Hobbes. Okay, you compare him with Hobbes also. Okay, while Hobbes says that liberty is where law is silent, On the contrary, Locke asserts that where there is no law, there is no liberty. Okay. For Hobbes, the contract is out of necessity. Okay. For Hobbes, basically, contract is out of necessity. Okay. Whereas for Locke, contract is out of inconvenience. Inconvenience to make laws, to adjudicate laws, and to execute laws. Okay. Sorry, contract is out of convenience. Okay. Out of the necessity of convenience. Okay. Sorry. Then you can also link Aristotle here. So, in his first treatise, basically Locke echoes Aristotle by arguing that political power is different from parental or masterly authority. Okay, that the political power of masters is way different from that of the statesman. Okay, that one. Okay, so political power is fundamentally different from masterly authority. Okay, then what is the modern relevance here? Okay, here as we have told about Locke's triad of life, liberty, and property. Okay, served as the blueprint for U.S. Declaration of Independence. Okay, then U.S. Declaration of Independence. Okay, they were influenced by Locke's rights to liberty, life, and property. Okay, then a feminist critique. Okay, basically by Carol Petman. So, according in her book, okay, in Sexual Contract, she argues that the social contract, that the social contract was a sexual contract, okay, that excluded that excluded women from public sphere and confined them to the private sphere. Okay, so with this, his theory of social contract is over. So now we are going to read about Locke's theory of property. Okay. So first, the historical context, or the context is basically that he refutes patriarchalism. Okay, refutes Filmer's patriarchalism. Okay, Okay, basically, Fillmore believed that God had given earth and its fruits to Adam and his heirs exclusively. Okay, so basically, Fillmore believed in the divine right theory. Okay, so basically, Locke's theory was a direct challenge to Robert Fillmore's theory of patriarchalism. Okay, who argued that, so according to Fillmore, God gave earth, God gave earth and its fruits exclusively to Adam and his heirs. Okay, so this is what Fillmore believed. Locke countered this by asserting that God gave the world to all mankind in common. Okay, he used his theory to explain how individuals could legitimately claim private ownership. Okay, whereas so Locke rejects Fillmore's theory of patriarchy and counters that God gave the world to all mankind in common. Okay, and he used his theory to explain, and he explained how how individuals can legitimately claim private ownership. Okay, through his theory of property. Okay, so what is basically the foundation? Okay, so what is the foundation of this theory or his theory of property? Okay, the foundation of Locke's theory of property is self ownership. Okay. Hmm. So the starting point of Locke's idea of property or theory of property is the radical idea of self ownership. Okay, he famously stated that every man has a property in his own person. Okay, so every man has a property in his own person, meaning no one else has the right to an individual's body or their capacity to work. Okay, meaning no one has the right to an individual's body or their capacity to work. Okay, then let's talk about the origin. Okay, so where is basically the origin of his theory of property? Okay, so it is in the labor theory of value. Okay, the labor theory of value. Okay, so first, the so Locke argues that property is created through labor. Okay, property created through labor. Okay, then when now wait, then he distinguishes labor, or like he tells what basically labor is. Okay, so of a slave, labor of a slave, and labor of his horse. So basically, a master who does his own labor as well. Okay, then the labor of his slave and the labor of his horse. Okay, these are all also included in the labor of the master. Okay, basically that is labor plus earth. Okay, means all the natural resources. Okay, used with the labor. Okay, is what creates the property. Okay, so Hobbes basically mixes. Sorry, not Hobbes. Sorry, Locke uh, argues that when an individual, according to Locke, when an individual mixes their labor with natural resources like such as tilling a field, okay, or picking an apple, that resource is removed from the state of nature, okay, then that resource is removed from the state of nature and becomes and becomes their private property. Okay, so basically, labor is what adds labor is what adds value to earth, transforming transforming common waste into useful products. Okay. Hmm. Then, so basically, original original you can also write that initially property was common. Okay, then it became industrious and enterprising, which led to private property, and then the people who are lazy, quarrelsome, and daydreamers, they are not able to acquire private property because of their nature. Okay, then here Locke also gives limitations. Okay, so three limitations. So three limitations on right to property. Okay, So first is the labor limitation. Okay. So basically these limitations are to prevent greed and ensure fairness in the state of nature. Okay. So first is the labor limitation, which basically means that one can only claim property that they have personally put labor into. Okay. One can claim only when they have put their labor, okay, into it. Okay. Then the second limitation is the spoilage limitation. Okay. Basically, no right, individual has no right deprive others to deprive others of their right to property, of their right to property. Okay. So basically, one one must leave enough and as good for others to ensure everyone can survive. Okay. Then the spoilage limitation, which basically means that one has no right to spoil property. Okay. No right to spoil property. Okay. Which means one should not take more than they can use. Okay. If property spoils before it can be consumed, it is considered an unjust appropriation. Okay. And also no destruction of property, basically. No destruction of property. Okay. So these were his three limitations that he put on the right to property. Okay. Then what is here the role of the state? Okay. So what is here the role of the state? So role of state with respect to right to property. Okay. So the state's rule is the preservation of property. Okay. And so basically for Locke, property rights are pre-political rights. Okay. Right to property is a pre-political right which was even there in the state of nature. Okay. Even before a government is formed. However, because the state of nature lacks a common judge, okay, to resolve property dispute, okay, to adjudicate, like basically is to resolve property disputes, then when individual, that is why individuals enter a social contract to form a government, okay. So basically, law here also says that so the sole purpose for the formation of a commonwealth is the protection of property. Okay. So then here the state acts as a night watchman. Okay. So basically the state acts as a night watchman, that is to safeguard guard property. Okay. Then basically basically the state cannot take property including tax without the consent of the governed. Okay. So no taxes without the consent without the consent of the governed. Okay. Basically it subverts the ends of the government. Okay. Hmm. Then so with this we have come to know that Locke basically gives absolute right to property. Okay. And thus we can also call him as the scholar of possessive individualism. Okay. You can quote here C.B. Macpherson, okay, for possessive individualism. Then we can now write some linkages here. Okay. So some links. Okay. So first is Robert Nozick, who believes that minimal state is minimal state as inspiring and right. Okay. Then so basically modern libertarianism exemplified by Nozick's entitlement theory. Okay. Entitlement theory also you can link here that builds on Locke's theory to argue for minimal state, okay, whose sole duty is protecting the rights, okay. Then you can also link C.B. Macpherson as I told here, okay. Hmm. Then you can link mm, Rousseau here, okay. So Rousseau is basically a critique here, okay. So Rousseau contrasts Locke by arguing that the first person. So according to Rousseau, who the first person to enclose land and claim this is mine was the true founder of civil societies, inequality and conflict. Okay. Then you can mention Hobbes here, or link Hobbes here. So basically Hobbes, so they basically between Hobbes and Locke there is a conceptual contrast. Okay. So unlike Hobbes, who believed property is an artificial creation, okay, of the state for security. Okay. According to Hobbes, property is artificial creation of the state for security. Okay. But Locke asserts that property is pre-political, okay, existing before the state. Okay. Then you can also link here Gandhi, okay, Gandhi's trusteeship model. Okay. So this is basically a critique. Okay. So while Locke focuses on absolute ownership, his theory is often contrasted with Gandhi's theory or Gandhian idea of trusteeship. Okay, where property is held for the benefit of the community. Okay, and so this theory of property acts as the foundation of economic justice as well. Okay, then you can also quote here Marxists, okay, who are a critique of Locke, and they criticize Locke as an apologist, apologist and theorist of bourgeois society. Okay, so I think with this we are done with his theory of property. After this, very small theories like theory on toleration and Locke as feminist, okay, that are remaining. Okay, so now here is a small table of comparison between Hobbes and Locke. Okay, so basically it is a comparison between their theories, their concepts, and what contrast is between them. Okay, so for example, Hobbes believed in human nature as passion only, whereas Locke believes in passion and reason. Okay, so like this you can read this and figure it out. Okay, so on toleration, so basically Hobbes is also called as the father of enlightenment. Okay, so he also gives the freedom of religion. Okay, freedom of religion, and he famously comments that no one listens to the magistrate in matters of conscience. Okay, then so basically he wants the state. So what should state do about toleration? Okay, so the state should adopt. Okay, should adopt the principle of of toleration to towards different religions, okay, or different towards the followers of different religions, okay, which was not there in Hobbes. Basically, in Hobbes, the state should dictate, okay. So you can write a criticism here of Hobbes where the state dictates, okay, who to follow and what to follow, okay. Then, but according to him, state should not tolerate atheists, okay. So basically, this is the point of his criticism, okay, where you can criticize him. Then, according to him, okay, a society which practices or practiced, which practiced intellectual and religious toleration is or is the most desirable order, okay, or basically is the most desirable, okay, that a man can achieve, mankind can ever achieve, okay. Then basically he also criticized Filmer's biblical account of the origins of political power, okay. Then his views as a feminist, okay. Then so basically he gave a political role for women, enabling them to enjoy their rights, okay. You can also see this is in contrast to or is a different view from Plato and Aristotle, okay. Then he grants mothers an equal title with fathers to authority over their children, okay. So grants mothers equal title as fathers for authority over children, okay. Then he also grants right to property to women or wives who have labored for it, okay, or who have worked hard for it. So basically, he gives them or grants them right to property and the freedom to have property as well, okay. Then he also classifies marriage as a contract, okay, and not natural, okay. Then he also said that women are politically equal, and natural differences are irrelevant. Okay, so basically, you can write this as a critique of Aristotle. Okay, in his theory of citizenship. Okay, then one or two criticisms here. Okay, so the first criticism is power of decision making in the family was still with men. Okay, and basically he thinks that husband's rule over his wife was, or husband's rule over his wife was a non-political form of power. Okay, husband's rule over his wife was non-political. Okay, so this is also criticism. Okay, then the second criticism is by Carol Patman. Okay, one, two, three, four, five. Carol Patman. Okay, so according to her, in her book, so Sexual Contract. Okay, she views social contract theory as developed by Hobbes and Locke. Okay, so social contract did not consider women as persons or citizens. Okay, that is her criticism. Okay, here on toleration, I told by mistakenly Hobbes as the father of enlightenment, but it is not Hobbes, it is Locke. Okay, then conclusions. Okay, simple basic conclusions on Locke. Okay, so the first one is why he is the father of liberalism. Okay, so as the father of liberalism, Locke redefined political legitimacy through the consent of the governed, by establishing the state by establishing the state as a conditional trust, as a conditional trust for preserving inalienable natural rights. He provided the foundational blueprint for modern constitutionalism and the moral right to revolution. Okay, so if a question is asked on social contract or democracy, okay, so you can, or on liberalism, so you can write this conclusion. Okay, then the second conclusion is about his individualist and rights angle. Okay, so an individualist, out and out, Locke's legacy lies in subordinating state authority to individual liberty and property. His assertion that the end of law is freedom, end of law is freedom, transitioned political thought from medieval obedience towards modern rights, cementing his role, thus thus cementing his role as the architect of Western democratic governance. Okay, here you can also add one or two value additions. Basically, for example, Locke's emphasis on constitutionalism. Some points you can add here. Locke's emphasis on constitutionalism, consent and toleration. Okay, consent and toleration. is basically the foundation of modern political theory. Okay, modern political theory. Then another part you can write is about USA. Basically, USA is a nation of Lockean individual. Okay, is a nation of Lockean individualism. So basically, Locke, you can associate Locke as America's philosopher king. Okay, so with this, we have completed Locke. After this, we are going to do J.S. Smith. Okay, thank you.